Now, there are already several fantastic videos on YouTube which analyze the music of Jacob Collier. However, I've yet to see one in which a composer walks you through their process of actually writing a Collier-style musical passage. So that's basically what I'm gonna do in this video, or try to do. There's a lot going on in Collier's music, so to narrow things down, I'm going to focus mainly on some of the harmonic concepts at play in Collier's arrangement of the Flinstones theme and pure imagination. Surprisingly, many of these harmonic techniques rely on super basic concepts of tonal harmony, albeit concepts that Collier cleverly disguises using more advanced techniques. So without further ado, this is how to reharmonize a melody in the style of Jacob Collier. First things first, choose a melody to reharmonize. Pick an existing melody and make sure it's adequately simple and tonal. This will allow you to focus all of your compositional energy on writing the harmony. The melody I went with is Ode to Joy. Next, create a basic harmonic outline for your melody using simple idiomatic jazz progressions. Simple jazz progressions and Collier, really? Yes, actually. Surprisingly, despite his use of fairly complex techniques like microtonality, the majority of Collier's harmonic language remains tonal and relies on basic functional progressions. So start by working with the two most popular jazz progressions, the 2-5-1 and the 6-2-5-1. 2-5s and 6-5s work great as cadences, so I'm going to put my 6-2-5-1 in the last two bars of the melody. Since we're in the key of C major, that means that the 6 is going to be an A minor 7, the 2 is a D minor 7, the 5 is a G dominant 7, and the 1 is a C major. Note that we're sticking with 4-note chords for now, so that we can focus more on outlining the right chord functions. We'll move on to 5 and 6-note chords later on. Let's have a listen. Now, before moving forward, it's important to note the root motion in the 2-5-1 progression. Each root note acts as the fifth of the following note. This tonic dominant motion is something that Collier exploits over and over again in many of his pieces. Okay, so next, add a chromatic passage using tritone substitutions. Collier typically reserves these types of progressions for the moments of greatest tension or drama in his pieces. So I'm going to put my chromatic passage in the second bar of the melody to accentuate the momentum of the quarter note run. Despite the fancy name, it's very easy to use tritone substitutions. Pick a dominant shape and just move it down chromatically. Then adjust the notes in the chord to fit with the harmony accordingly. Let's take a look at the progression I wrote. First, we have a 2-5-1 in E flat with a flat 2 or tritone substitution instead of the 5. Then we have the 5 of E flat, which functions as the tritone substitution of the 5 of A minor. In other words, the last chord in this bar has a function in both E flat and A minor. Thankfully, at this point, the rest of the progression seems fairly obvious to me. We're not going to do anything too crazy. I'll start on the 1 or C major 7 and then I'll move to the 5 of F, a C7 or C7 sus4 in this case, so that the transition between the bars feels smooth. Again, it's important to note how much we're using dominant tonic motion or 5-1 chords. And don't forget tritone substitutions. These progressions easily allow you to add chromaticism to your music that feels natural and earned. So it's no wonder that Collier, and like every jazz composer ever, is a huge fan of these progressions. Okay, let's have a listen to our completed harmonic sketch. Okay, so this is where things get interesting. Rewrite your passage using Collier-style chords. There's a fairly simple formula for creating what I call Collier chords. Start by writing out the triads to the following chords: 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. These triads can be in root position or even in an inversion. You can add a 9th or a 7th or a sus4 to the triad if you like. Next, pair up your triad with the bass notes of different chords from the same series. And that's about it. You got yourself some Collier chords. So Collier often uses these chords as substitutes for the more standard chord voicings you would hear in a 2-5-1 or 6-2-5-1 progression. So for example, at the beginning of Pure Imagination, we get a 1 over a 2, followed by a 4 major 7 over a 5 going to a 1.
Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination.
And in Flinstones, we also get this in many places. So for example, here we have a 1 add 9 over 4, followed by a 4 add 9 over 2, which strongly implies a 1 which never arrives.
Flinstones, meet the Flinstones.
And in some cases, Collier even uses full polychords, like in this example where we get a series of complete dominant chords over minor triads.
Have a yabba yabba do time, have a yabba do time, we're gonna have a gay old time. Wow!
Okay, at this point you might be thinking, this is a little strange. There are much more obvious ways of interpreting these chords. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I favor this interpretation for a number of reasons. Chief among them, that it helps me write music that I think sounds like Collier. All I ask is that you give this approach a try and let me know if it helps you. If not, what interpretation of Collier chords do you find most helpful? Okay, so let's add these chords. First, I substituted the 6-2-5-1 in the last two bars with Collier chords. I couldn't find a chord I liked for the 6th or A minor 7, so I used a 1/4 instead. So now bar 2 needs to change to accommodate this new chord. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as it gave me an opportunity to use two other Collier techniques that I really like. The first involves using chords made out of fourths instead of thirds, and the second involves preparing a chord by first playing the chord's tritone sub and then its dominant chord. I find this makes the arrival of the target chord feel prepared, but also spontaneous and surprising. Okay, let's listen to the whole progression. Finally, add 1 or 2 notes to each chord to create 5 and 6 note harmonies. At this point, one guitar is no longer capable of playing these harmonies. Okay, that's better. Bear in mind that Collier often uses chord density expressively. So for instance, he'll go from smaller to larger chords in order to create a sense of heightened drama and tension. So with that in mind, I decided to use my largest chords sparingly. I put several of them in bar 2 to further emphasize that tension I was talking about, generated by the run and the chromatic bass line. Okay, also note that many of my chords feature major second intervals in the upper voices. This is a super common feature in Collier's music. So major seconds are a much softer dissonance than minor seconds, and as such, they're a great way to create a cluster effect, but with a more resonant and less noisy sound than if you were to use minor seconds. Okay, so the chord progression is done, but it still doesn't quite sound like Collier. So as a final push, add some rhythmic elements found in Collier's playing, such as tuplets and odd time signatures. So for example, Collier will often shorten or lengthen all the notes in a section by the same amount. Similarly, he also freely lengthens or shortens bars by 1 or 2 beats to create like an exaggerated rhythmic effect. Okay, so bearing that in mind, I changed the rhythm of the first 3 notes in bar 2, so we get 4 notes in the space of 3. As I've mentioned a million times, this bar features the fastest melodic rhythm of the melody, and adding tuplets is a way to exaggerate that shift. I also moved the bar into 5/4 to fix my least favorite thing about this progression, the transition between bar 2 and 3. The chromatic run I added makes this transition a little more smooth sounding to my ears. And then because I couldn't help myself, I added a Collier style run at the end in the last bar. It's more or less just the tonic triad with a little bit of chromaticism. Collier loves these types of call and response style runs. For example, we get them throughout Flinstones and Pure Imagination. It's a great reminder that your harmony doesn't have to follow the exact harmonic rhythm that your melody does, and allows your harmony to sound more free and expressive. Okay, cool. Well, let's listen to the finished product. Okay, so that sounds less like Collier and more like a bad recording of a Les Paul and Mary Ford song. So if the harmony and rhythm aren't to blame, then what's going on here? A particular instrument-specific color or timbre can play an enormous role in how we experience the chords played on that instrument. To illustrate this, check out this passage from Flinstones arranged for piano instead of voice. Yeah, that sounds less like Collier and more like Stravinsky at his most jazzy. One of the reasons for this difference is that dense 5 and 6 note chords with lots of dissonances tend to sound much harsher when played by instruments with strong attacks like guitar and piano than they do when played by instruments with comparatively softer attacks like voice. However, that's not to say that attack is the only issue here, because strings can have softer attacks than piano and guitar, and yet the same Flinstones passage arranged for a string ensemble also doesn't quite sound like Collier, at least not to my ears. So what exactly is it then? If we look at Conrad Godfrey's fantastic transcription of Flinstones, then we see all the different syllables Collier uses in his arrangement. These syllables allow Collier to explore different shades of timbre within the voice, some more percussive and others more muted, but all distinctly call to mind the sound and history of a cappella music. All that to say, one of the things that gives Collier's vocal harmonies their special quality is that they are clearly written with the voice in mind, and as such, arranging them for any other instrument will always leave something lost in translation. Or at least that's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, please check out my Patreon if you'd like transcriptions of the reharmonizations I use in this video. Also, if you use these techniques in compositions of your own, I'd love to hear them. Tag sound and something in them on Instagram, and I'll share my favorite in my story. Thanks so much.